you think about sales operations, you hear a lot of different people talk about it, and they mention it as sales operations being the glue to a lot of different other departments, whether it's finance, marketing, HR, obviously sales and manager success and customer success. But what is the shape of glue? It's amorphous. And because of that, you have to adapt and dynamize. But you can't have a particular function. You can't have a particular department be amorphous and undefined and just purely structured as reactive. Given that, the few structures you do have in place have to be pillars. One where they're stable and the core concept, identifying things, and I'm just going to spitball here, like identifying your core KPIs, your sales activity, your pipelining. Those are some things that are just key fundamentals within the status of what makes sales operations both nimble and amorphous, but the glue that holds things together.
This is RevOps Demystified, the number one most downloaded podcast in revenue operations. We invite the brightest minds in RevOps onto the show to deconstruct the what, why, and how behind rep productivity, forecasting, metrics, and all things revenue. This podcast is brought to you by Ebster, a revenue intelligence platform used to identify risk in the pipeline and score customer engagement. Hello, and welcome to another very special episode of the Sales Ops Demystified podcast. Today, we're joined by Brian Chin, who is the Director of Sales Operations at Spring Health. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Brian, I'm sensing like 11 to 13 years experience in the sales ops world. Is that accurate?
That is correct. It's not a career trajectory that I would have expected, but it's one that I'm glad I made the decision to jump into.
Yeah, let's dig into that. So, what, like this decision that you made to jump in, where did that come from? And actually, maybe before that, what did you expect you would be doing before you did jump in?
Well, a graduate of NYU, I focused a lot on computer information systems, and I always imagined myself to be a back-end programmer. It's one who had a key role in architectural designs and building up the infrastructure of the organization. And as I started diving into that, I realized that it didn't allow me to create the balances that I normally wanted. And going into sales operations, one of my first roles into sales operations was working for Yahoo, where I helped with a now defunct team called Hot Jobs to scale and identify business intelligence. And to me, there was just so much more about sales operations versus data engineering and building it up. Whereas on one end, with data engineering, you focus on the receivables of what your constituents wanted and then build that up. With sales operations, you analyze and thought about what are the key drivers and movers, and to me, that was just a more cerebral environment that just gravitated me more toward that field.
Makes total sense. And this is a really hard question, but what is the number one most important thing you've learned about sales ops over the past decade?
To be nimble and fluid, and that your job, your industry will change within a year or two, and you have to adapt to that. When we look at, Tom, the chronology of sales operations, especially in the New York metro area, it's, as you mentioned, in the last 10, 12, 13 years, it's evolved drastically. In the beginning, sales operations mostly consisted of looking at reports, maintaining those reports, sending those reports out, and you just focus entirely within the sales velocity funnel. But as the chronology has evolved and morphed, now you start looking at the TOFU, the top of the funnel metrics. You start looking at the post-sale cycles. You start looking at your involvement with rep operations. So to me, sales operations really indicates the ability and the goal of trying to provide answers to questions that have yet been asked. And in doing so, you have to adapt. You have to be nimble and focus on looking at demystifying, using your keywords here, identifying the different areas where you need to understand better, adjust your sales stack, and most importantly, to adjust the way you have sales enablement processes for your team to evolve.
And I was expecting you to stumble or hesitate when answering that question, but that came straight off the tongue. So it must be a big theme for the last decade of your work. Can we now zoom into Spring Health and just quickly break down for the audience roughly the amount of reps you're supporting and then also the size of the sales ops team?
Yeah, we are actually supporting 25 and fingers crossed, it will be within the end of the week, 32 reps. And we're just growing at an exponential pace. But in addition to the reps, we also service a lot of people in finance and HR and marketing, which we won't necessarily get into here at this point. But our sales ops team, when I first joined Spring Health, it was a team of one, myself. And this year, we've grown to 3. And most recently, we've acquired a 4th one. So we have 4 now. And I expect the team to grow significantly lockstep with Spring Health's trajectory also.
So can you break down the roles of the 4 resources in sales ops? Like how have you split the work between the 4?
I'm very glad you asked that question because the current situation of sales ops we have now is completely different in a lot of different organizations. In most organizations, you have the hierarchy and breakdown of sales ops individuals focusing on being function managers and function leaders, where one person will potentially handle sales velocity questions, another person will handle the pipeline attrition, and so forth. Here at the Spring Health, we have a very flat, what I call a sales operations lake, to mirror the way that sales operations has been looking at data, in which sales operation data now is more of a data lake as opposed to a data warehouse. And in that regards, we have one person who focuses a lot on the back end, the architecture, working with the peer sales operation and enablement of Salesforce. Myself and another individual, we're the generalists, so to speak, and we manage high-level strategy to identify sales capacity and a lot of levers. And our newest hire will focus on more involvement with our revenue operations and financial analysis of that. And what's great about this is we built a redundancy program where we make sure that not only are we masters of one area, but we try to learn from each other and we try to rotate these roles on a quarterly basis and cadence.
Incredible. I'm always interested in new ways of working. For some reason, I just find that absolutely super interesting. And hopefully Alex is going to dig more into those details as we move forward in the interview. What would you say right now at Spring Health is your biggest sales ops challenge?
Right now, we are focusing on identifying sales capacity because Spring Health has recently secured a Series C of funding of $190 million. We're growing tremendously and going exponentially high. We were recently valued at a $2 billion valuation. And given that we have high, lofty goals, and given that this is the first time in which we've had a true capture as to how to grow, not only call it exponentially, but now immediately move to the next cadence of a high growth organization from a startup. So given that, sales capacity is one where sales operations is going to be the key focus of helping the organization scale appropriately. From sales operations, we understand what is the sales team, what is the number of sales team and reps that we need to hire. From there, that's going to trickle down to understanding how many BDRs we need, how many customer success managers do we need, how many client service ops we need to service those. And the top of the funnel, how many marketing individuals we need to help with that bow tie. So given that, it's all centered into a linchpin of sales operations and identifying sales velocity.
Oh, what an answer. Then, once we've overcome this challenge, right, on the horizon of your pipeline, what would you say is the one project or initiative that's super strategic that you would be tackling, let's say, in the next 6 to 18 months?
Well, there are a couple of things. And I would say the key thing is making sure that we scale appropriately and making sure that everyone has a great pathway to growth and scalability, to making sure that we are constantly fresh and we dynamize our product offerings and make sure that we always are reinventing the wheel and making sure that it's fresh. And more importantly, I like to bucket it instead of a specific project. I like to look at it as pillars of areas where we tackle or retackle. We have, Tom, we have the descriptive analytics that sales operations focus on. We have the prescriptive analytics and we have the predictive analytics. 80% of most organizations focus only on the descriptive and the prescriptive. What are the problems now and how do we fix them? But instead, we're trying to move past that, and I'm trying to look at what are our current problems, how do we solve the scale, but more importantly, what are the predictive analytics? How do we solve for problems that we have been asked? So that's one of the biggest challenges. Being a new organization where we're growing, we've only been around for like 5 years, and we're trying to scale to become not only a 2 billion valuation organization, but a 10 billion and a 50 billion. We just don't know what problems may arise. So we're throwing all these different scenarios and building out an excessive amount of case studies and diagrams, go at statistics to understand what could potentially be our pitfalls.
It sounds like the holy grail of sales ops, being able to predict and maybe even solve the problems that haven't occurred yet. On that note, Brian, we're going to bring in Alex to go into a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Brian. That was a really fascinating discussion. It's always good when I come in thinking, I wish Tom asked more questions. There's so much stuff here. So that was great. I think I just wanted to pick up on, to start with some of the things you just said. So you said you try and look at things as pillars rather than sort of areas and projects. Is that if I paraphrase that correctly?
That is absolutely correct, yes.
Cool. And why is that? How do you see that as different, looking at them as pillars?
Well, when we look at different functions, different problems, different areas, the common misconception, even to someone who's not familiarized with sales operations, you see a problem, you address it, you solve it, you move on. That's not the case with sales operations. Instead, you need to build upon that and layer it like an absolute pillar. When we look at solving the problems of descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analytics, what do we solve for an organization that has 100 individuals and employees versus 500? Those are 2 separate cadences and 2 completely separate types of problems. And then doubly so more for 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 employees. So given that, what we do is we build upon that and layer it up from the foundation level. So that's why I see it as pillars.
Amazing, thanks. That's what I thought. So yeah, we don't do something and we finish it. It's an ever evolving build, and you're sort of getting to new layers of complexity or value that you deliver in those areas. And I guess it reminds me, at the start, as you said, that the field is ever changing. So even if the company is in the same sort of size bucket as it was before, what was right for a year ago may not be right anymore.
Absolutely, Alex. And when you think about sales operations, you hear a lot of different people talk about it, and they mention it as sales operations being the glue to a lot of different other departments, whether it's finance, marketing, HR, obviously sales and manager success and customer success. But what is the shape of glue? It's amorphous. And because of that, you have to adapt and dynamize. But you can't have a particular function. You can't have a particular department be amorphous and undefined and just purely structured as reactive. Given that, the few structures you do have in place have to be pillars. One where they're stable and the core concept, identifying things, and I'm just going to spitball here, like identifying your core KPIs, your sales activity, your pipelining. Those are some things that are just key fundamentals within the status of what makes sales operations both nimble and amorphous, but the glue that holds things together.
Thanks, that. Yeah, really helpful. I love the idea of the glue, as you said, that's really flexible, but also the pillars that are sort of rigid and being set. And there's the idea, that you don't want to be completely reactive, because anytime you're reactive, that's you're not adding the most value you can be. So being able to be proactive as well, which also I guess ties into what you're talking about with your sort of predictive analytics. And would you be able to share a bit more about sort of areas that you've been trying to work on with predictive analytics?
Yeah. So when we talk about, let's backtrack a little bit, let's talk about descriptive and prescriptive, and this may not apply to everything, but I would say that it applies about 80% of what I've personally experienced in my career. When we look at like descriptive analytics, the key things that we can bucket into are the rules of 5s and 3s. The 5 key descriptive analytics are like your sales velocity KPIs, your sales activity overall, like how many calls you make and so forth, your pipelining, your segment and vertical like analyses as you break things down, and then your revenue analyses. All those are descriptive analytics that, are you addressed as what is the landscape? What is the problem? What is the situation? And then to solve those, you have the predictive, that match them, the trend analysis for the KPIs, the sales effectiveness and efficacy, of sales activity, your gap analysis and your forecasting, for your pipelining situation. How do you look at behavioral targeting and insights for your segment analysis and your go-to-market analysis for your revenue? Those are the areas that a lot of companies look at as descriptive. And these are the ones where they're prescriptive, which they provide reports, KPRs, and cadences. But that handles your problem now and in the near future. For predictive, you want to dive forward from your sales velocity KPIs, and your trend analysis. How does that handle automation and dashboarding, in which you have all the answers at your hand? From your sales activity and such, you understand how does it dive into the DNA insights of what is a prototypical superstar hire employee versus that of your average. What are the key things and differentials that solve that? From your pipeline, you look at what is the average account lifecycle, product analysis, and what are the ways that you massage an account to grow into that superstar whale. And look for your behavioral targeting analysis. What do you look at for marketing intelligence? How do we feed the tofu top of funnel index? And then lastly, the most important of all, from your revenue analysis to your go-to-market analysis is your strategic innovation, which means you just repeat the process over again on a different scale. So when we look at predictive analytics, it's really based upon things like what is the automation that we have at hand? What is the DNA of the great employee or the sales rep? What is the average account lifecycle? And how do we make sure that those two are married together? And then with marketing intelligence and strategic innovation, then we identify the holistic health of what is a potential future of our scalability. And then we repeat that process and exciting adventure all over again.
Amazing. Thank you. That was very comprehensive. And I just wanted to pull in one more thing from it, because you said, analyze what makes that fantastic, that great employee. Can you just explain again what you do with that? Is that so you can try and help replicate and skill others up, or is that what is the goal of understanding that the ideal employee?
Well, it begins with making the best fit and the best hire. And I'm not saying that certain potential applicants aren't good or bad, but it's just a matter of right fit. Alex, what are the different areas of the organization that can provide for an employee, and what are the different strengths that we can use to leverage? We try to identify what are people's best working habits, how they work with their sales efficacy, how do they work with their sales stack, and to make sure that they have the best onboarding experience. To me, part of sales training is just the onboarding experience. There's nothing more replicable than that. And having that great onboarding experience really helps and rep understand the business model as well as the product itself. So that way they know it at the back of their hand. And then from there to understand what can we do to leverage the success. A lot of sales organizations will put people to high quotas, throw them into the fire, and they don't produce, then they can't. That to me is inexcusable. Everyone who's hired has a great core innate talent, and if they're not a right fit, then we have a discussion about what we can do to massage those areas and improve that. For those superstar levers who proactively go out and they do X, Y, and Z that's above and beyond the call of duty that's not identified within the sales role, those are the ones we want to identify. What are key habits? How much time they're spending, on their marketing? How much time they're spending on their prospecting? What are the different leadership traits that everyone from the top down can have? So that way we have this collaborative pool of leadership traits, leadership skills, and leadership expertise that we can spread around and make sure that everyone is elevated. Because within a sales role, it's not just having these reps try to hit the quotas and markers and so forth. Is looking at how do we make them grow to make sure that they're leveraged the best, love what they do, and to make sure that they're looking at this as a pathway and elevation to the next roles as well.
Great, thank you. Really, really comprehensive, and I really like that idea of looking to get the most out of your people, so build out, train them up, and as you said, taking charge of all those enablement pieces to really not just have these great processes and provide all the analytics, but to make sure that the actual machine is turning and working as designed. And that really brings me on to what you were talking about your own team earlier, and just when you mentioned about rotating roles on a quarterly basis, and Tom flagged it to me, but it had already made my ears perk up. I'm really interested for you just to explain a little bit how you try and balance that, being both specialists but also generalists, and having that redundancy among the team.
Yeah, so if we were to take a step back, anyone who jumps into a sales operation role, like they come into it because they love data. That's, they love data. They're data geeks, they're data nerds. They love insights. They love having that input, of how do we grow an organization. But given that, you don't want to be siloed. And because, as I mentioned, that sales operation requires someone to be very nimble, it's a tough task to ask someone to be in a sales ops role, managing X, Y, and Z. But on the flip side, being able to teach themselves A, B, and C. It's no secret that 10, 15 years ago, Salesforce wasn't as prevalent then as it was now. Back in the past, you had even the sales stack, Excel, Access. Those were the OGs, of sales operations. Now we have so many things: Tableau, Salesforce. So even on the tech end alone, you need a lot of teaching and education. And you could take doing courses, and I'm not knocking those out. But to me, I've always found that the best experience is working hands-on with your colleagues to better understand what is the application of this sales tax for the strategic initiative, for the strategic project. So that way you could see the throughput and impact of how that rolls out, whether in some cases, whether it's, for example, sales capacity, whether it's revenue growth, whether it's redesigning territorial mapping, and having that role, we try to appeal to each other's strengths where we settle in. And then we identify an area that makes us uncomfortable and an area that makes us comfortable. So that way we could focus on a secondary role of learning what makes us comfortable. In this case, for me, it's working with strategy, and then working with finance and financial revenue operation as my secondary interest, but one that, and I'm just throwing this out there, that I'm uncomfortable with, working with building out like the process design of architecture of Salesforce and learning more of SQL and SOQL and so forth. So that just helps us have a holistic blend of greater skill sets altogether. And we know that being in the real world, where we have been, especially nowadays, where we need a lot of great mental health breaks, and so that we don't burn out at both ends, we need to take a step back. And given that, when there's a function expert and a function specialist missing, that can throw out the dynamic of the cog of the great machine and wheel. So being that we need someone who also wants to step in and understand our role. So we want a situation where our sales operations team is a clear sales operations lake in which anyone can step in, understand more, and overall, for the career as an additional function, just grow better as an individual and just learn more holistically.
Amazing. Again, just a really human and a really attractive kind of working environment where, your career development is obvious because actually you're getting to do as many things as you want, as often as you want. And actually there's plenty of challenge and change day to day. Because again, what does a data geek want? They want more problems to go and solve, and doing the same thing again and again is going to get a bit of a drag. So actually having new and exciting things to keep doing is going to be a great place to develop.
Absolutely. I actually give my team call like a stretch goal, in which like maybe 2 quarters down, 3 quarters down, think of your most bizarre, fantastical stretch goal that you have that's not necessarily related to sales operations. And let's think about that massage. And that gives people an opportunity to explore different areas where they would normally have done in such a whimsical manner.
Cool. And then last question from me. Again, you said just how quick changing the whole sort of revenue sales operations environment is. Are there any kind of new changes that you've seen or changes you think are coming? Any sort of general insight that you want to share with us?
Oh, that's a tough one. That's probably the first question that's made me like stop and pause for a second. I think it's important, especially in the way sales operation is reactive to their own internal stakeholders, which is sales, finance, marketing, and to be cognizant of the fact that you're going to be reactive on a secondary basis of how your other sales teams and reps are going to be reactive to the changing environment. We've seen how the global scape has changed significantly in the past 2 years. And given that, there's a big bifurcated discussion. Do you want to focus on making sure we're going down this route, of having some wildcat changes? Do we want to go down other route of making an assumption that things will go back the way they are, pre-COVID? So that's one of the ways where a lot of sales operations leaders are at the loggerheads. To me, I think it's best to embrace the two and prepare for both bifurcated views and shifts.
Amazing. Thanks very much, Brian. Tom, do you want to come back and rejoin us?
Relentless answers from Brian. No pauses at all. But now, the most important question of the show. Who in the world of sales ops would you most like to take for lunch?
Oh, God. Can I give 2 answers?
Yes, we will permit that.
Okay, there's 2 individuals that I've been a big fan of. Never met them, but I've been keeping track of their trajectory. One is Brian Kelly from Snowflake, and he has just a tremendous trajectory of making sure that they're dynamized insights and making his organizations just grow and scale rapidly. And then the other is a bit of a legend of Akira Mamizuka. He is the VP of Global Sales Ops at LinkedIn, exactly. And he is someone who, when you look at the inception of LinkedIn, and where it is now, and you may not have joined it right at the beginning, but so all the different landscape changes and the hurdles that he's had to encounter are just mind-blowing. So
yeah, we had Akira on a few episodes ago. Awesome interview. David Kelly of Snowflake, though, we haven't. So we may reach out, ask him to come on the show. And if he does come on, we'll also mention that you want to take him for lunch as well, Brian. So, Brian, I can clearly tell that you are super passionate about sales ops. I think that really shines through in the immediacy in which you can give these answers. We were only able to stump you or force you to hesitate twice with those 2 wildcard questions at the end, Brian. But I want to thank you so much for coming on, being so honest, sharing everything you're working on, specifically the structure or the slightly different structure of the sales team or sales ops team format, which I think is going to be really interesting for the audience. But I think it was really valuable generally. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. And thank you, Tom and Alex. It's been great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of RevOps Demystified. If you're listening on a podcast listening application, please follow, rate, and review the show. And if you have any questions about the show, can recommend a guest, or just want to learn more about RevOps or Ebster, hit us up at podcast@ebster.com.